The Holy Gospel according to St. John, the 15th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus said, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit. Every branch that bears fruit, he prunes to make it bear more fruit. You have already been cleansed by the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me as I abide in you. Just as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me you can do nothing. Whoever does not abide in me is thrown away like a branch and withers. Such branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you abide in me, and my words abide in you, ask for whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples. The Gospel of the Lord. So one way to translate the words that Jesus talks about today in the Gospel reading is to have the words stay connected in place of abide. Because that's really what the word abide means. It means stay constantly connected. Not just kind of keep an eye on me, not just check in once in a while, but stay constantly connected in the same way that a branch needs to be connected in to the trunk and the roots of the plant if it wants to continue to live. Stay constantly connected. So here's my problem. I have developed, and maybe you have too, a kind of a love-hate relationship with staying constantly connected over the years. Because sometimes staying constantly connected is a really great thing, and sometimes it's just a pain. So when Jesus tells me to be constantly connected, I think, man, 10 years ago, I never imagined I could be this constantly connected. And I'm already constantly connected in some really great ways. Being constantly connected means that there is always somebody there to help me out. That's why I was an early adopter of cell phone technology. Sometime back in the late 90s, I got stuck dead on the road when the car died and it was night and there was nobody around, and I thought, maybe there is something to that cell phone thing, and now I don't worry if I get stuck on the road. Being constantly connected allows me to be able to interact with friends and loved ones who I otherwise would never see. The other night, one of my high school buddies and I were sitting in my den. We were talking with a friend of ours from high school like he was sitting there because we got FaceTime. And we were all sitting there having a conversation. He lives 1,500 miles away. That would never have been possible just a few years ago. And being constantly connected allows me to be able to share my highs and lows with people I love and care about in ways that I just couldn't do before. Remember the days when if you wanted to share a picture, you had to actually get another print made and put it in the mail and send it someplace? If you want kids to look at you like you got two heads, you tell them about the time that you were living in Gaithersburg and you had a friend in Alexandria, and it was a long-distance phone call that cost you money to talk to them. Like, constant connection, it's a good thing. But it's also a pain. Being constantly connected is a pain because we never really leave work. We're always on email, and we're often monitoring what's going on at work, even when we're on vacation. Being constantly connected is a pain because we're constantly bombarded with the latest scary crisis in the world, which, even while that raises our awareness of global need and injustice, sometimes just serves to make us scared and numb, and to make us question whether or not what we're being fed is really stuff we should be caring about, worried about, or whether it's just stuff that sells. Being constantly connected can be a pain because we are so inundated with trivial nonsense that the important stuff that we want to get through gets lost in the shuffle. So when Jesus tells me about the importance of staying constantly connected, I gotta tell you, I often have mixed feelings. And yet, there's something different here. Jesus doesn't just say, stay constantly connected. Instead, he goes on and he talks about the purpose for being connected to God and for being connected to one another. He goes on and he says, so that you can bear much fruit. There is a purpose, Jesus says, to this connection. And that got me to thinking that so many of us, even those of us who are not tied into 47 different social media chains, so many of us are so overly connected, but many times we don't stop, at least I don't sometimes stop, and ask why. Why am I connected? What purpose is the connection supposed to serve? And do I edit and use those connections in ways that are actually life-giving? Often, I think that we don't stop and ask those questions. And really, I think what Jesus is doing in today's gospel reading is not just telling us, stay connected, but he's asking us to think about the quality of those connections, to ask why we're connected, and to make connections in such ways that they actually help us to bear fruit. And the fruit that Jesus usually talks about is things like faith and hope and love of God and of other people. Are our connections actually engendering those things? Those are questions that I think Jesus is asking us to consider. Not giving us easy answers, but instead asking us to consider each day, even in our overly connected lives, things like, are we focusing on the connections that are really life-enhancing? Because being connected, just to be connected, is in the end just exhausting. And when Jesus talks about branches that are not bearing good fruit, those branches are still connected, but they're not doing anything. Are we actually considering whether our connections are bearing fruit in our lives, or are they just connections we have to stay connected? Jesus wants us to consider questions like, are the ways that we're connected bearing fruit? Are they doing life-enhancing things that they should be doing? Are the connections that we have helping us to grow in faith? Are they helping us to have more hope? Are they helping us to love God or to love others? See, sometimes I think in church we particularly have this problem because we want to have these kind of life-giving connections to God and to one another. But often we get hung up thinking about, well, I need to connect in this way or this way or this way. And frequently I've heard people say, well, you know what, if you really want to have this deepened connection to God, what you got to do is you got to pray in this particular way. Or you got to go to this kind of Bible study. Or you got to go on this kind of a service project, because all of those things are good. And they work for some people. They help people plug in to the life-giving power of God. But all of them don't work for every person. So when Jesus talks to us about pruning, he's asking us to consider, are the things that I'm trying to connect into actually helping me to deepen my relationship with God and other people? If they're not, am I willing to stop them so that I can make room to try something else that actually might work and bear fruit in my life and in the life of the world? And in fact, maybe one of the most important questions Jesus is asking us to consider is, in the midst of our over-connectedness, are we really connected at all? Sometimes I think that we end up, at least I feel like this occasionally, I feel like I'm really, really connected, and sometimes it just makes me feel like I'm busy and I'm important and I'm plugged in. But sometimes, and deep down, I wonder, am I really connected? Are we really more connected to God, to the people that we love? And when we get in those situations, sometimes we feel like, you know what, I just want to unplug. I want to disconnect. I want to quiet the craziness that's going on around me. But is that really going to be a good strategy, or just make the situation worse? Because even in our overconnectedness, Jesus reminds us today that being connected to God and to one another really is important. But Jesus also calls us to focus on the right kinds of connections and the quality of those connections, the ones that bear the fruit of faith and hope and love. Jesus calls us to consider which connections need to be enhanced and which ones need to be pruned so that we can continue to grow as children of God. And maybe most importantly, Jesus reminds us each and every day that the connection to God is always available to us, each and every day, even at those moments in our lives where we feel that we're the most disconnected.